What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
They say weddings bring families together, but whoever said that never stood outside a country club ballroom in 4-inch heels, holding a gift bag with a $500 espresso machine you knew damn well the bride would return, while your name wasn't even listed in the program. I wasn't offended, at least not at first. I had shown up, smiled for pictures, kept my hair neat and my mouth shut. I had done what everyone expected of the sister: be supportive, be quiet, and for God's sake, don't draw attention. And I was used to it. I'd been playing second fiddle for so long, I'd almost forgotten what it was like to even hold a melody. But that weekend, Ben's wedding weekend, turned out to be the breaking point. Not because I wanted it to be about me. No, it was because everyone else worked so damn hard to pretend I didn't exist. I flew in Thursday night on a red-eye from Seattle, straight from a business expo where I'd pitched my skincare line to 2 national retailers. I hadn't even changed out of my blazer. I landed, rented a car, and drove straight to the hotel, where I'd booked myself a room, since the couple had conveniently forgotten to include me in the family suite. That should have been the first clue. But I brushed it off. Maybe they'd had budget issues. Maybe Avery didn't realize I needed a room. Maybe. That's the thing about people who've spent their whole lives cleaning up messes. They always find a reason to excuse the ones who make them. Friday morning started with a brunch I hadn't been told about. I walked into the lobby to grab a coffee and saw a group of women in pastel wrap dresses, bridesmaids, laughing near the bar. One of them whispered something when she saw me, and the other one nodded, looking a little embarrassed. I heard just enough to know what had been said. I thought she wasn't coming till tomorrow. And I just smiled and stirred my coffee with a plastic stick like I hadn't heard a damn thing. Because that's what you do when you're the sister. You smile. You sip. You stay small. Ben wasn't picking up his phone, but that wasn't new. Since he got engaged, our conversations had dried up into transactional texts. Can you Venmo me for the catering deposit? Do you know where Mom's birth certificate is? Avery wants to know if you can keep your toast under 2 minutes. Real heartwarming stuff. I used to get calls at 2 in the morning when he was crying in his dorm room after Dad died. I used to sneak money into his account when his scholarship didn't cover books. I used to stay on the line while he hyperventilated, just breathing with him, telling him over and over that he was not alone. But I guess none of that fits into a wedding slideshow. By Friday evening, I'd met the full cast of characters. Avery's mother, who looked like she'd been carved out of cream cheese and anxiety. Her father, who introduced himself as a consultant, but wouldn't say in what. And Avery herself, who looked stunning in every photo and exhausted in every real moment. I tried to offer help once, just once. I asked if she needed anything for the welcome dinner. She smiled like she'd just bit into a lemon and said, No, we're all good. We've got it all covered. And then, as if to punctuate the point, she added, It's just one weekend, right? That phrase stuck with me like a splinter. Just one weekend. As if that minimized everything. As if all the years leading up to this didn't matter. As if the checks I wrote, the debts I ignored, the time, energy, therapy bills, all of that was just background noise. It wasn't even about the money, not really. It was about erasure. It was about how easily people forget who built the foundation once the house is finished. That night, at the rehearsal dinner, things hit a new level. My name wasn't listed on the seating chart. I wandered around like a wedding crasher with a wine glass, trying to spot a place card. Finally, someone waved me over, one of Ben's college friends, who scooted his chair to make room for me at the far end of the table. He said, I thought you weren't coming. Avery said you had work or something. And again, I smiled. Because that's what you do when your throat is closing up and your chest feels like it's holding in an earthquake. You smile and you nod and you thank them for the seat. After dinner, Avery approached me. It was casual, almost too casual. She slipped in beside me like we were old friends, like she hadn't spent the last 48 hours treating me like a ghost. She leaned in and said, in that soft, sugary voice reserved for white wine moms and pageant queens, Hey, Rachel, just a quick thing about tomorrow. I turned to her, and for a split second, I thought she might say thank you. For the dress I helped her pick out. For the full bar I covered. For the outdoor heaters I booked when she complained the forecast was too cold. But no. What she said instead was this: when you give your toast, can you please not make it about you? I know you've been close with Ben and all, but this isn't the time for that. You're just the sister. And I swear to God, the room tilted. Not dramatically. Not like in the movies. Just a slight lurch, like my whole world had shifted 1 inch to the left. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just smiled and said, of course. But something in me cracked right then, something small, but old. I'd spent 17 years building Ben a life. I was 24 when our parents died in that accident. He was 11. I could have sent him to live with an aunt. I could have started over. But I didn't. I raised him. I held him through puberty, through heartbreak, through nightmares and student loans. I built his life like a goddamn architect with no blueprints. And now, standing there in rented heels and a dress I couldn't return because I'd spilled champagne on the sleeve, I realized I'd been written out of my own story. Avery walked away like she hadn't just gutted me. And I watched her go with the strangest sense of calm, like watching a tornado touch down in slow motion. Because that was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to stay quiet. I wasn't going to let this weekend pass like a polite ghost. I was going to give my toast. And I was going to make it count. But I do it my way. Clean. Precise. Devastating. And not one single person would see it coming. There's a certain silence that comes not from the absence of noise, but from the presence of something unspoken, something thick in the air, something no one wants to name, but everyone feels. That was the silence I walked into Saturday morning as I entered the bridal suite with a tray of coffees, 5, all labeled, all correct, no cream for Avery, extra almond for her mother, hot chai for Ben's godmother, and one for me, untouched. Because I wasn't planning to stay long. I hadn't been asked to come, of course, hadn't been invited or texted, hadn't even been acknowledged since Avery's little hallway performance the night before, but I brought the coffees anyway, because that's what I'd done for years, filled in the cracks, handled the logistics, played the unglamorous part of family support staff, and I guess, somewhere deep down, I still believed doing one more nice thing might make someone notice the 100 before it. I didn't expect a red carpet, but the way Avery's mother looked at me, as if I'd tracked mud onto antique linen, told me exactly what my role was supposed to be: silent, peripheral, disposable. She took her cup without a thank you and turned back to whatever quiet crisis had erupted about the photographer running 10 minutes behind. I stood there for a moment, holding my own drink, watching the swirl of hairspray and floral robes in tension, and I realized that, once again, I was in a room where no one really saw me. I could have been anyone: a hotel employee, an early caterer, a friend of the cousin who came from Florida. No one looked up. No one asked how I was feeling. No one even noticed that I'd made sure the makeup artist got the right address this morning after she'd been sent to the wrong Hilton. And that's when it hit me, not in a dramatic, heart-wrenching way, but in the slow, sinking kind of way that makes your fingers go cold and your jaw clench without realizing. They weren't just ignoring me. They were rewriting me out of the story entirely. I wasn't the sister who raised Ben anymore. I wasn't the one who paid the security deposit on the venue when the first check bounced. I wasn't the one who helped Avery's father out of a financial bind last winter when he didn't want his contacts to know. I was just the sister mentioned, maybe, out of politeness, but never really welcomed. I left without saying a word. The coffees were cooling on the table, and no one even noticed the unopened bottle of champagne I'd dropped off earlier, the one Avery had requested as her special vintage but couldn't find locally. I had ordered it from a wine shop 2 states over and driven an extra hour to pick it up, just so everything would be perfect. And yet, even perfection wasn't enough to buy basic decency. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for a while, the dress for the ceremony hanging untouched on the closet door. It was seafoam green, satin, tasteful but not flashy, and I had bought it with the idea that I didn't want to outshine the bridesmaids, but now I was wondering why I even bothered. I hadn't been asked to be in the bridal party. Avery had claimed it was just too complicated to include family on either side, but then I saw the photos from the bachelorette party, her sister, her cousin, Even a college roommate with a pink sash and matching robes. Complicated, my ass. The only complication was me being visible. Around 1 in the afternoon, I made my way to the venue, an upscale lakeside resort with manicured lawns and chairs tied with ivory ribbons so stiff they looked like they might crack if you touched them wrong. Guests were milling about, sipping champagne, taking photos in front of a floral arch that had cost, I kid you not, over $8,000, an arch I paid for, by the way, on my personal credit card. After Avery called me crying 3 weeks before the wedding because their florist had upped the quote last minute and Ben didn't want to disappoint her. I told myself at the time that it was just another expense, another line on a long list of things I was happy to give. But as I watched strangers posing under that arch, smiling like they'd built this fairy tale with their own damn hands, I felt something shift. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being erased, quietly and efficiently, like a line item on a budget no one wanted to explain. The ceremony went by in a blur. I clapped in the right places, smiled for the photos, and even managed to look touched when Avery read her vows that somehow made no mention of family or where we come from, but had 2 paragraphs dedicated to their favorite brunch spot in Austin. And then came the reception, a ballroom glimmering with rented crystal and flickering candlelight, a scene straight out of a magazine spread. I had chosen the lighting package myself, after the planner said their original one looked a little flat on camera. I had upgraded the menu, swapped the chicken marsala for beef tenderloin, extended the bar service by 2 hours, and paid the musicians extra to learn Avery's favorite song for the first dance. But as I stood in line for my name card, the coordinator smiled and said, "And you are?" And I realized they didn't even know who I was. That's when I heard it, just a small detail, dropped casually during the officiant's opening speech. He said, "Ben and Avery wanted to personally thank everyone who helped make this day possible, especially their families, who supported them every step of the way and allowed them to create this wedding all on their own." That line, "on their own," hit me like a slap. I had paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers, the bar, the goddamn cake. I had written checks so large they made me nauseous to sign. I had dipped into savings I swore I'd never touch. And now, here I was, being publicly removed from the narrative by a man reading off a script handed to him by a couple who apparently thought gratitude was optional. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I took my seat, ate my overpriced salad, smiled at the table mates who had no idea who I was. I didn't need to explode or confront or cry. I didn't need to throw a drink or storm out or make a scene. Because I was already planning something better, something quieter, sharper, and far more permanent. And then, just before dessert, Ben leaned over and whispered, "Hey, Ratch. Keep your toast short, okay? We don't want to bore people." That was the moment I stopped holding back. Because boring? No, Ben. I may be a lot of things, but boring was never one of them. And tomorrow, during that toast, I was going to remind everyone exactly who built this dream. And exactly who tried to bury it. There is a strange kind of power in knowing a secret no one else in the room suspects you're holding, a quiet, steady strength that doesn't need volume or theatrics to make itself known. Only the right moment and the absolute willingness to speak when silence is what they expected. That ballroom, lit like a cathedral and full of curated smiles and borrowed grace, was not built for honesty. It was built for illusion. Every inch of it, the centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the coordinated cocktail napkins with monogrammed gold letters, the string quartet playing Coldplay like it was Mozart. All of it existed to uphold the fantasy that everything was perfect, everything was earned, and everyone present belonged there because of merit, love, or lineage. And yet, as I sat at the table with a glass of wine I could barely taste and a stomach full of steak I didn't remember eating, I knew that truth, once spoken, would crack that fragile shell open so fast that no one would even remember what the lie sounded like. The air shifted just slightly when the coordinator approached our table and leaned down to whisper that the toasts would begin in 5 minutes. I could see Ben glance sideways at me, a little nervous, a little rehearsed, like someone checking on a fire he thought he'd already extinguished. Avery, for her part, didn't look at me at all. She was deep in conversation with someone's aunt, laughing lightly, swirling her champagne like she'd been doing this kind of thing her whole life. Maybe she had. Maybe in her world, weddings weren't about messy family histories or complicated loyalties. Maybe they were just another event to host, another stage to stand on, another performance to perfect. But for me, this moment had taken 17 years to arrive, and I wasn't about to let it pass with a polite applause and a forgettable platitude. When the MC tapped the microphone and welcomed the guests' attention, asking them to remain seated for a few words from the bride's father, followed by the best man, and then the groom's sister, I noticed the subtle clench in Avery's jaw. Not fear, not panic, but irritation, like a driver who'd just been told there'd be a detour. She had probably hoped I'd back out, hoped I'd take the hint, swallow the insult, and let the evening proceed uninterrupted by anything remotely real. But that's the thing about being underestimated for too long. Eventually, you begin to enjoy the moment right before the reveal. The speeches before mine blurred together into a warm buzz of nostalgia, light humor, and predictable phrases. Ben's best friend talked about their freshman dorm. The father of the bride made a joke about losing a daughter, but gaining a financial planner. And the crowd chuckled right on cue. Then the microphone was handed to me, and I stood, not with flourish, not with force, but with the kind of calm that only comes when you've already made peace with whatever comes next. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as I approached the stage, and I could feel every eye turn, every whisper pause, every head tilt just slightly, curious to see what the groom's sister would say, especially since most of them still didn't seem entirely sure who I was. I looked out at the room and began, not with a joke, not with a memory, but with a truth. I'm Rachel, Ben's sister. And before I say anything else, I just want to thank everyone here for coming to celebrate this beautiful, expensive day, one that has taken an enormous amount of planning, compromise, patience, and, as it turns out, money. There was a ripple of awkward laughter, the kind that sits on the edge of discomfort, waiting to be told whether it's allowed to exist. I was told yesterday kindly, of course, not to make this about me. And I understand that. Weddings are about the couple, about love, about the joining of two lives. But I think it's only fair to tell you that this day, this very celebration, would not be happening literally if not for me. The silence was instant and absolute. No shifting chairs, no wine glasses clinking, no nervous throat clearing. Just stillness. I paid for this wedding, I said, letting the words land without ornament. Not just in spirit. Not just in late-night phone calls and emotional support. I mean financially. Every chair you're sitting on, every bite of food you've tasted, every flower on every table, those were gifts. Not because I was asked, but because I was told in so many words that there was no one else. Because when our parents died and Ben was 11 and I was 24, I stepped into a role that I never chose, but never once ran from. And when he said he wanted this kind of wedding, the kind that looked like a magazine spread and tasted like a luxury retreat, I didn't say no. Even though I wanted to. Even though I should have. I glanced toward Ben, whose face had gone still and pale, his hand slowly tightening around his glass. Avery was frozen beside him, lips parted, eyes dark, a look of disbelief blooming like a bruise. And for a long time, I told myself that love meant doing what was needed, even when it wasn't acknowledged. I told myself that being invisible was part of the job. That being just the sister was an honor, not a burden. But then I sat through a ceremony where my name was never spoken. I listened to a speech that praised people who never wrote a check, never raised a child, never stayed up all night wondering how to make rent and tuition work at the same time. I watched the credits roll on a movie I produced, directed, and funded, and somehow wasn't cast in. And I realized silence doesn't equal grace. Sometimes it just equals erasure. The room was still impossibly quiet. A few eyes darted toward the exits. A couple of phones were raised, then lowered again. No one dared interrupt. So this isn't a toast. Not really. It's a reminder that the people who build you are not always the ones standing in front of you when the lights are brightest. Sometimes, they're in the wings, sewing costumes and sweeping floors. And sometimes, they get tired of being backstage. I looked directly at Avery then, not with malice, not with cruelty, but with the kind of certainty that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. To the happy couple, I finished, raising my glass. May your future be built on truth. And may you never forget the ones who gave you everything and asked for nothing. I stepped down before the applause could begin or not. I didn't care. I didn't wait for reaction, validation, or outrage. I walked off the stage, down the side aisle, past the tables full of frozen faces and held breaths, and out the door into the night, where the air was cold and real and mercifully free of glitter and lies. The toast was over. But the fallout? That was just beginning. There's a very specific kind of silence that follows a public reckoning, not the shocked silence that comes with a dramatic outburst or a drunken speech, not even the scandalized hush that sometimes settles after a fight or a revelation, but something colder, deeper, and much more dangerous. It's the silence of calculation. It's the silence of people trying to decide how much of what they just heard is survivable, how much can be dismissed or reinterpreted, and how quickly the narrative can be spun into something more palatable. That was the silence I walked into when I returned, slowly, deliberately, to the edge of the ballroom, slipping in through the back corridor, not because I was ashamed, but because I was done performing, done playing polite. Done pretending that this entire charade of gratitude and family unity hadn't been quietly rotting from the inside for years. I didn't expect applause. I didn't even expect confrontation. What I got, instead, was the unnerving, theatrical calm of a stage crew trying to patch a collapsing set while the audience is still seated. The DJ, bless his soul, had clearly been briefed on a just-in-case scenario because before my heels had even left the hardwood stage, he had started a playlist so upbeat and generic it could have been ripped straight from a chain restaurant's dinner hour. People stirred slightly in their seats, some clapping with exaggerated enthusiasm, others whispering behind hands or simply looking anywhere but at me. No one tried to stop me. No one tried to speak to me. They just let the noise swell up like a tide meant to drown the awkwardness, as if loud music could erase what I'd said, or smother the echo of truth still hanging in the air like smoke. I made my way to the outdoor patio behind the ballroom, a place I'd chosen months earlier when working with the planner, thinking it would give guests a lovely sunset view over the lake. I leaned against the stone railing, facing the water, breathing in the early evening air, trying not to let the adrenaline burn a hole in my chest. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. If anything, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally stopped dragging a weighted suitcase through someone else's dream. But that clarity came with its own ache, because no matter how much I'd accepted the truth of my role, no matter how long I'd been preparing for the quiet unraveling of my relationship with Ben, there was still a piece of me, raw and stubborn, that wanted to believe this could have gone differently. It didn't take long for him to find me. I heard the door behind me swing open, the muffled thud of dress shoes on concrete, and the hesitation in the footsteps that followed, a hesitation that told me more than any words could have. He wasn't storming out. He wasn't ready for a fight. He was uncertain, conflicted, and maybe, just maybe, afraid of what he was about to learn about himself. "I don't even know what to say," Ben said, his voice quieter than I remembered, like he was already aware that nothing he offered would be enough. I turned to face him slowly, taking in the tuxedo he wore, the sweat gathering at his temples, the eyes that looked too much like our father's when he was cornered by something he didn't understand. There was no hatred in me, no rage, just a strange, exhausted clarity that felt like standing in a house long after the fire trucks had left. "You don't have to say anything," I replied, not coldly, but not kindly either. "Saying nothing is kind of the theme around here, isn't it?" He winced at that, and for a moment I saw the boy I used to tuck in, the boy who used to sleep with the light on after Mom died, the boy who used to whisper, "Thank you," like it was sacred every time I packed his lunch or helped him with math homework. But that boy had grown up into a man who had allowed someone to diminish me over and over without stepping in. "I didn't know you felt like this," he said, not accusingly, just sadly, like someone trying to reverse an earthquake with apologies. I shook my head, because I couldn't let him believe this had come out of nowhere. "Ben, you stopped asking how I was 3 years ago. You used to call me when your car broke down, when you had a nightmare, when you didn't know how to cook rice. And then you met her and everything changed, not because you fell in love. I was happy for that, truly, but because you let her rewrite the narrative. You let her decide that acknowledging me would somehow take the spotlight off her, and instead of reminding her who held you together all those years, you stayed quiet. Over and over. You chose quiet. He looked away then, not because I'd said anything particularly cruel, but because he knew it was true. And sometimes the truth isn't the loudest thing in the room, but the heaviest. I didn't think it mattered, he whispered. I mean, I thought you didn't want the attention. You never asked for anything. That right there was the heart of it, the assumption that because I never demanded recognition, I didn't deserve it. That my silence had been consent. That my sacrifices had been free. No, I said, the words sharp but not angry. I didn't ask. But that doesn't mean it didn't matter. It means I was waiting for you to notice on your own. I was waiting for you to care without being told to. He opened his mouth to respond, but the door opened again, and Avery stepped out onto the patio, heels clacking against stone, face already twisted into that perfect blend of performance panic and righteous indignation. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She went straight to Ben, like I wasn't even there, like the words I'd said only minutes ago had never been spoken at all. Babe, this is ridiculous, she said sharply, grabbing his arm. She ruined our night. We can't let her sit out here like she's the victim. This is our wedding. And then she turned to me finally, openly, and the mask cracked just enough for the edge underneath to show. I asked you, nicely, to keep it simple. To not make it about yourself. You couldn't do one thing right, could you? It was almost laughable, the way she framed it, as if I were the one who had crossed some sacred boundary, as if telling the truth calmly, plainly, was more of an offense than pretending someone didn't exist. I didn't ruin your wedding, I said evenly, meeting her eyes. I paid for it. And when you erase people, you don't get to act surprised when they show up holding receipts. She stepped back like I'd slapped her, but I hadn't even raised my voice. I didn't need to. The truth had already been delivered. Ben stood between us, silent, caught in the middle like a man who'd just realized the walls he'd been living between weren't holding him up, they were caving in. He looked at Avery. He looked at me. And then he said the thing I knew was coming, the thing that had been simmering since the moment I stepped onto that stage. You need to leave, Rachel. He said it gently, almost apologetically, as if kindness could soften the blow. But the words were there, hanging in the air like finality. Not a request. A conclusion. And I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was finally done. I didn't speak again. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't make a scene. I walked past them, through the ballroom, past the tables where people avoided my gaze, out into the parking lot where my car waited. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment before starting the engine. And as I pulled away from the venue I had financed, the ceremony I had enabled, the celebration that had never made room for me, I didn't feel regret. I felt release. But what I didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't finished yet. Not really. Because closure isn't something you get from others. It's something you take for yourself. There are moments in life when the sound of your own breathing becomes louder than anything else around you, not because the world has gone quiet, but because something inside you has gone still, like a switch has been flipped, a fuse has burned out. Or maybe a storm has finally passed through and left only silence in its wake. That's what I felt the next morning as I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, my suitcase zipped, my phone face down on the nightstand, and the crumpled remains of a handwritten speech in the trash can across the room. The sunlight bled through the heavy curtains in narrow strips, casting soft lines across the carpet, as if the day itself couldn't quite decide whether it was beginning or ending. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the need to. Somewhere between the ballroom and that gravel driveway, I had shed every last piece of the person who still hoped things could go back to how they were. And that version of me, tired, loyal, hopeful to the point of self-erasure, was gone. The hotel lobby was nearly empty when I walked through it, my heels clicking on the polished floor, the echo bouncing off glass and granite like a rhythm I was finally in sync with. There was no note from Ben. No text. No apologies slipped under the door. Nothing but the lingering scent of overpriced cologne and whatever perfume Avery had drenched herself in the night before, the kind that tries to smell expensive but ends up feeling hollow. I didn't check out at the desk. I'd prepaid. Just like I had prepaid for the wedding linens, the floral arches, the security deposit on the venue, and the bridal suite where she'd hung her $1,000 gown and never once thought to invite me in. As I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat, I noticed a small envelope wedged under the windshield wiper. For one fragile, flickering moment, I thought maybe it was from Ben. Maybe he had left me a letter, some last grasp at decency, some acknowledgement of the weight I had carried for so long on his behalf. But when I opened it, all I found was a receipt. The bakery had made a mistake with the final invoice. Another copy of the bill. A courtesy note. Another reminder that even the cake, the towering, five-tiered symbol of their love, had been funded by someone they no longer wanted at the table. I crumpled the paper without reading the rest, tossed it into the passenger seat, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. The drive out of town was quiet, long stretches of two-lane road cutting through woods and sleepy neighborhoods that hadn't yet woken for the Sunday rush. I passed the diner where Ben and I had once split pancakes after our parents' funeral, both of us too hollow to speak, but clinging to the comfort of syrup and coffee like it might hold us together. I passed the bus stop where I'd stood at age 24, clutching his backpack and a crumpled permission slip, trying not to cry while he boarded his first day of middle school without Mom to take the picture. I passed the church where Dad had been buried, and where I had, for one foolish second, believed we could still be a family. None of it hurt like I thought it would. It just felt distant, like a book I'd read years ago and no longer recognized the plot of. Time is cruel that way. It lets you carry people long after they've put you down, lets you believe you're still vital to their story when, really, you've been edited out in quiet, intentional stages until all that's left is your outline in the margins. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my house, a modest but comfortable craftsman tucked behind a row of aging maples in a Seattle suburb, my phone had buzzed twice, once with a promotional email from a store I'd long forgotten I subscribed to, and once with a voicemail from Darla, my mother's best friend and the closest thing I had left to a parental figure. I didn't check it right away. I sat for a moment in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled, the silence swallowing the noise of the road behind me. It was strange how the world didn't stop spinning after what had happened. Strange how, after all that truth, all that tension, all that sacrifice laid bare in front of a room full of strangers, the sun still came up, and I still had to unload my bag. Inside the house, I unpacked slowly, deliberately. I placed the dress back in its garment bag and hung it in the back of the closet, not because I intended to wear it again, but because throwing it away would have felt theatrical in a way that no longer interested me. I moved through my space like someone reacquainting themselves with their own life, touching things I hadn't noticed in weeks, appreciating the silence not as loneliness, but as something I had earned, the kind of quiet that comes after you finally stop asking for permission to be seen. Then, finally, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and listened to Darla's message. Her voice, warm and raspy from decades of bourbon and menthols, filled the room like a presence. "Well, you did it, honey. I saw a video someone's cousin posted before they yanked it down. Don't ask me how I found it. I know how to use the internet, and let me tell you, I've never been prouder. You didn't break them. You just showed the cracks. And if they can't handle the truth after all you've done, then they never deserved the lie in the first place. Call me when you're ready. Or don't. Either way, I love you. And you're not alone." I played the message twice. Not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed to anchor myself to the reality that someone still saw me, not the version they needed, not the one they could use, but the real, whole me. Later that afternoon, I took out a manila folder from my filing cabinet, one I'd labeled future back when I still thought everything would eventually fall into place. Inside was a stack of documents, business registration forms, licensing details, financial projections. My skincare company had been growing steadily, but slowly, hampered by the thousands I kept funneling into Ben's life. I had told myself that helping him was temporary, that once he was married and stable, I could refocus on my future. But now I saw that the reason I'd never quite crossed the line into full success wasn't about timing or bad luck. It was about not allowing myself to be the main character in my own story. So I filled out the final papers. I filed for the expansion I'd been delaying for over a year. I emailed a retail buyer I'd met in San Diego and asked for a meeting. I booked a solo trip to Santa Fe, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had always postponed for more important things. That night, just before midnight, my phone rang again. I stared at the screen, heart suddenly heavy, breath caught somewhere between curiosity and grief. It was Ben. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped, until the room was silent again. No voicemail. Just a missed call, hanging there like a question I didn't owe an answer to. For a moment, I considered calling back. Not out of hope. Not out of forgiveness. Just to hear his voice and decide for myself what was left. But I didn't. Some things, once broken, don't get put back together. Not because they can't be, but because they were never supposed to carry that much weight in the first place. And as I turned off the light and let the dark settle around me, I knew I hadn't burned a bridge. I'd just stopped pretending there was one.